Well, welcome everybody to the ACT Division's ATSE hybrid webinar for the month of May. I'll just start by doing a quick acknowledgement to country. Daura Nuna, Daura Nunawal, Yangu, Nalimanyin, Dunimanyin, Nuna Walwari, Darawari, Dindi, Wan Jiran Lin Yin Jin Yin, which translates to this is Ngunnawal country. Today we are all meeting together on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders. And I pay any respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are with us today or online. So Helen apologizes for not being able to be with us today. She is attending a funeral of a close colleague in Melbourne today, but she's very kindly given me some notes to use to open the event, so I will diligently stick to them. So obviously we've got Therese and Michelle today to co-present to us on the reality of Australia's water crisis. Australians have always lived with highly variable rainfall, with drought and flooding rains embedded in our culture, poetry, stories, and our ecosystems, communities, and industry, and have adapted to these extremes. Nonetheless, the impacts of too much or too little water on our economy, and my word, we're feeling that at the moment, livelihoods and environment are significant, as we are seeing the recent events in South Australia and Victoria and New South Wales, particularly recently. And we're seeing this enormous disparity between flooding in northern New South Wales and droughts in southern New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. Climate change, together with the changing nature of our urban population and industries, are shifting the nature of these impacts and risks. Warming temperatures and hotter extremes are increasingly water demanding by plants and people, and droughts are becoming more intense regardless of the changing rainfall because of greater water demand. Increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are changing the atmospheric and ocean processes that influences Australia's weather and rain-bearing events, so rainfall patterns are shifting. For example, observations over recent decades show a clear drying trend in the southern parts of the continent, while rainfall is increasing in the north. Rainfall intensity is increasing because the atmosphere is warmer, and so we are seeing more and more record rainfall events. This is the context for today's talks that will present two perspectives on managing the reality of managing Australia's water crisis. And I will pass to Therese to lead us off. Thank you, Therese.
Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for being here in the room and to everyone who's also online. I also wish to echo my acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. And part of that acknowledgement for me is just focusing on two areas here today. I'm highly, highly cognizant that this session has timed with the launch of National Reconciliation Week. And of course, that's very important to us at ATSE, as well as to myself personally, and probably to many of those online. That wasn't the purposeful intention, but perhaps given the journey that both Michelle and I are going to take you on, maybe it is just a little bit fitting. But that's part of my acknowledgement is to the National Reconciliation Week this week as well. I'm also inspired by the work that was done with CSIRO and Indigenous nations and peoples with the Our Knowledge, Our Way in Care of Country project, which also had quite a lot to do with water and a lot of guiding principles in that from a range of case studies. And so cultural water, Indigenous water knowledge is also part of their songlines, and then moving through to the more modern post-European settlement poetry as well that was referenced in our opening. Thank you very much. Picture this. We are a learned academy. I think the majority of those that are online and in this room are here because of ATSE. I don't need to tell you too much about the technical and scientific aspects of water. We all know a fair bit about that. What I do want to remind us of and hypothesise is that around our title today, and that is Australia's water crisis. They're three very, very important words. Australia being the kind of nation that it is built upon in terms of both its geographic extent, its history, some of the longest connected human activity on the planet, as well as its, I suppose, the way that it is governed and the jurisdictions that exist. These all have a web that is very Australian. Water. Water is life. Without water, nothing else happens. Now, I know that we have many other forums across ATSE, but honestly, water is the most fundamental one. And as the chair of the Water Forum, I need to continually advocate for that. Because without water, you can't have the agricultural forum or the education forum or, energy, etc. Water is absolutely fundamental. We will not exist if we didn't have water. And sometimes I feel that gets a little bit subliminally messaged in the nuance of today's policies, politics, and the key areas. It comes front of mind, of course, when we have floods and droughts and some of the tsunamis, cyclones, etc., that do hit the media and other things that draw our attention to water. Today, I'm going to take you through essentially a image gallery. So there's barely any words through this whole PowerPoint, you'd be happy to know, but you might be death by image. For me, I've got to a point in life where it's the imagery that really connects more than all of us needing to read a whole lot of textual information. This is, I think, to me, a bit of a messaging on this slide around the range of areas upon which water is life in today's society in Australia. It is a fundamental part of our industry, of our cities, of manufacturing, of agriculture, of our environment, and of our experience with it, as well as our safe drinking and sanitation. I'm not sure why I did that. I did not do that. It's also, I suppose, resounding back to that acknowledgement of country and our knowledge, our way. If you also take that, that's not just an Australian area, but cultural water is incredibly important in all societies around the world, be they both Indigenous, most recent, or current, modern, or future. People and personal attachment to water is very spiritual, very soulful, and very mindful. And so safe water and sanitation is my 30-year technical area and is incredibly important, but that spiritual cultural connection to water, the cleansing effect that it can have, is also what matters to us as humans. It also matters to the plant and animal life around us. And I think it's just important to know that, take that time, that when you're using the word crisis, you need these kinds of framings. So it is a crisis for us if water is not available in a safe, meaningful, appropriate quantity, quality manner for us as humans in the cities and cultures and ways that we operate, but also for the animal and plant life that surrounds us in that environmental sense more broadly, but very deeply. There's lots of connections with all of this. But we know that water is finite. We also know that when you use the words water and crisis, the first thing that comes up is droughts. So that takes me to reflecting on what drought means, not just for Australia, but the globe. Now, there's a couple of images here that are very Australian and some that come from around the world. And drought usually means lots of economic and community impacts, but also those for our animals and waterways. So our farms go bust, our economies shut down, we have famine, we have fish kills. Can't help but mention Murray-Darling Basin fish kill type impacts that come from drought, floods, etc. We have loss of human life that is associated with this, and we have loss of thousands and thousands and thousands of animal and plant life as well. So water is indeed fundamental to generating a crisis, some might say. The reverse, as we're experiencing on a lot of our media at the moment, is the floods. So some of these, again, are not just from Australian imagery, but from around the world. This is a whole of human, whole of globe element that wherever there is a water drought or a water flood, you are automatically in crisis because water is so fundamental. We also have the cyclones, we have tsunamis. And so with all of that, when is water not in crisis? Is there ever a time where it is not a crisis of water? I'm going to go back through a few different civilizations to just bring some ongoing context to that. So we know that these are 5 key examples where drought brought down and significantly impacted these from existing into the future. So there is essentially, I suppose I would almost put it as a challenge to find where humans have decided to inhabit a place that wasn't around water. The first thing humans look for as a species in order to operate and populate is a water source, a safe drinking, reliable water source, a safe place to use water in the products of agriculture, the products of industry, building materials, clothing, all of those fundamental elements through to today's technology required for the manufacturing of the textiles that we wear, the technology that we're engaging with today, the mobile phones that we're carrying, everything has water in its process. And these communities fundamentally do not exist today or had a significant change due to a drought episode. Now, that drought might have been a direct or an indirect impact, for example, leading to famine or leading to disease, etc. So you can technically argue some of the nuances, but I want to stay a little bit philosophical here. So humans have always placed themselves where there is water. And when that water changes by drought or by flood, more drought examples here, when you have it change by drought or flood, you are in crisis. So again, I hypothesize, when are we not in crisis with water if it's such a fundamental human requirement to exist? These ones are all directly drought-related examples. The ones on the previous slide, there's a bit of ambiguity of the drought periods leading to civilization impacts. These ones are a lot clearer around being directly related to drought. And some of these droughts are recorded as scientifically robustly as is possible with today's technology and statistics, and may be challenged into the future, but some of them are displaying periods of 100 years or 300-year droughts. Some might say they might be climate change episodes. The language can change and the analysis might change, but the theory of that leading and being deemed a water crisis will not. And these civilizations and humans were impacted forever from those changes. We can't talk about water crisis without thinking of the civilizations that also sought to develop infrastructure and engineering outcomes, both science and engineering technologies, to manage crisis. So we have a crisis. What are we engineering and scientifically doing to mitigate, reduce, and adapt to that crisis? So here we have some examples from the Roman type area and era, I suppose both in case. So as the Romans expanded their empire, you can pretty much travel and still see to this day the impacts of their water engineering for both drinking water, agricultural water, industrial water, particularly for pottery and other metal-based type products that they were manufacturing, as well as safe sanitation. So these are some of the civilizations that looked to harness and tackle what is a water crisis. For the last 3 weeks, I've only been back a week. I was travelling through Greece, so I have to throw in a few of my own photos taken during that trip and just talk about a couple of these. So it was hiking the Greek islands, and I've never much thought about water in the Greek islands in my career to date, I must say. And so I found it absolutely fascinating along this hike that so many of them have natural springs in these areas where you hike on rock for 100% of the day. It's rock, rock, rock and rock, and you can barely find a tree over a metre high anywhere. Yet there's all these magnificent drinkable water springs across the Greek islands. And for millennia, they've been accessing those springs. And here are a couple of examples on the outer sides. What was, I think, fascinating was that we also came to many springs that were, no, you can't use that one now. No, that one's dried out. No, that one's been forever changed. The settlement in the, for the photo in the middle there, looks like it's an archaeological site. Would you agree? You're travelling across Greece, you're forever walking across an archaeological site, and you feel like you're in a walking museum the entire time. We came across this scene with our guide on about day 10, so we've already done quite a lot of archaeology, so it's the first thing that springs to mind. This is actually in an area called Hora on the island of Amorgos, and hopefully I said that right for anyone of Greek heritage on the line. And this actually was abandoned in 1956 and 1957. Because there was a underground tsunami earthquake. There's a whole lot of papers about, anyway, it's best to probably say there was a tectonic change. Overnight, no water. Literally overnight, something in that fracture changed, no water. It meant that this whole area became uneconomic. We talked about economics in the beginning. It became unproductive. It became uninhabitable because there wasn't a reliable, safe water source. And they left. So we've created an archaeological site only in 1956. That really hit home for me when I was thinking about today's talk and what it means to be in Australia's water crisis. And to me, it is fundamentally, water is always a crisis because it's a 100%, it is the core ingredient for humanity to be here. It is the core ingredient for our plant animal life, for our agriculture, for our productivity, communities, cities, settlements, fun, leisure. It's just fundamental to everything. So what is the crisis actually about? And as ATSE Water Chair and involved in some of these submissions and projects, what I'd like to draw to a hypothesis is that it's a crisis that's created by governance, commitment, policy, strategy, upstanding, braveness. Water will always be a crisis because it is fundamental to what we need. What we do about it is where the crisis actually lies. And this is where ATSE and academies like ours can participate as independent, upstanding, passionate people. You know, Peter Derbyshire was just saying to me out there that one of the things he values about fellows is whilst we could be all, you know, a little bit difficult to deal with, we're all passionate, we're absolutely passionate. And so I really want to call on that passion and have an ask and a hypothesis. So we've developed a project that talks about a thriving Murray-Darling Basin 50 years from now. We also are advocating strongly to support and continue to develop a national water agreement. And these two things are kind of fumbling along, yet they are probably some of the world's leading and best examples of what's happening globally. Now, some might say that's fantastic. I also sort of say if however many billion people on the planet can't get the most fundamental water crisis thing in a bit better shape with all the tools and technologies and capabilities we have as humans, then perhaps it's a sad reflection that these two pieces are some of the best in the world. So a bit of a challenge there. If I deep dive on these a little bit, but not too much, you can go to web links and Google your life away, and I'm happy to put some of those out in a separate ATSE communique if that's I'm sure you've all read all 900 pages of the Murray-Darling Basin Project essays, and we've got some of the essayists here with us. But we really did bottle down to these key principles. And whilst these were driven as key principles for adaptation for the Murray-Darling Basin, every time I read them, for every submission or piece of work I'm working on, either with ATSE or in the work that I do technically, they hold fundamentally true. We need to have a healthy environment that is supported by sustainable, resilient water supplies of the right quality and quantity. This will then provide for vibrant communities. Without a vibrant community that has a safe water supply, it disappears, even in 1956. And I'm sure there's many other examples, but I'll just refer to Greece again because it was a great trip. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander self-determination, which takes us back to that our knowledge, our way, and our recognition of National Reconciliation Week starting today. Without enhancing that Indigenous culture here in Australia, what are we missing out on? We already know we've missed out on a lot, but that also holds true for lots of Indigenous communities in other nations as well. We need water for industries and regional transition. So that might be a little specific to the basin, but regional transition is actually important from a city view as well. And if you look at Australia's regional, rural, remote areas and aspects and approach to water, it's got far more challenges than what we have in some of our city areas. Yet so many people are choosing the tree change, as they call it, although, you know, a lot of those trees are not going to be there if we don't do something about the water for them. Sustainable food practices, technology transformation, all of this helps us provide more productivity. And essentially, when you wrap all of that up, it's about meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, and not just Goal 6 for water, but all 17 goals in a really genuine way. And when people talk to me about Sustainable Development Goals and they focus on water and Goal 6, I find it really hard to not find water in every single goal. You know, you talk about gender equity and gender equality. It's women that bear the burden of you know, in many cultures of, you know, spending their day just finding water and distributing that for the services that they need. You can't have great education outcomes without safe water, et cetera, et cetera. So I hopefully don't need to keep convincing you of that one. So they were the principles that we came up with from the Murray-Darling Basin Project. And for me, I'm really finding that they're just beautiful principles for adaptation for all of these situations. I've summed up the National Water Agreement in one slide, so feel free to go and Google a lot more detail. But it basically boils down to, it looks like they're heading to having 5-year action plans, annual reporting, and an independent assessment. Okay. They've got 7 high-level objectives. They've got outcomes that are the changes that need to occur. So what do we want to see that will be different, which is quite good. They also have a range of principles. Fundamentally, a lot of them are around the principles that actually will guide all the jurisdictions to do and talk about things in a consistent way. So consistency in definitions is a real barrier to the water crisis. And then there's a whole lot of schedules with all the technical detail that lots of fellows at ATSE, you know, love getting into. We've been commenting and putting feedback to the National Water Agreement submissions that have been coming out from all the different relative departments. What we're still not seeing, though, is a real commitment to, absolute commitment to governance in a very structured way. And we're still not, we seem to be a bit wishy-washy about an actual National Water Commission and what the role of a commission and commissioners can be, just like the achievements of the past with the National Water Initiative. So at ATSE, we're going to continue to advocate for the elements that came out of the Murray-Darling Basin Project, and also what we're advocating for with the National Water Agreement. And we are essentially, in principle, very highly aligned to everything in the agreement, other than a couple of nuances and tidy up, many of which were taken up in the last round of submission. A lot of our work was cited and absorbed into the latest round. And an absolute certainty of the re-establishment of a National Water Commission. And So change independent assessment on that slide and put National Water Commission, and I'll be a happy chappy. The Our Knowledge, Our Way project, there's a chapter, chapter 5, which I chose to draw out on today because, again, it's the action-oriented stuff. And when you actually overlay a lot of these key actions and principles, they're quite similar. It's about strengthening the knowledge that we have, building those partnerships, being collaborative, sharing that knowledge and doing something with it, and doing that through the networks that are available to us. And I really loved the imagery in here around it can be complicated having many different stakeholders, many different languages, many different cultures, but you get a much richer picture on the outcome if you spend some time on that. So my final thoughts that I'm going to leave you with here today from that hypothesis is that water is always a crisis. And really, for me, the main crisis is around what we're doing for knowledge, adaptation, and commitment. We need to invest, listen, learn, and share. We need to adapt through governance, finance, frameworks, measures, reporting, investment. And I should probably add definitions, because certainly common definitions is one of the founding issues. And absolute commitment that should be into everything. Interdisciplinary, intergovernment, interjurisdictional, and interregion, intercultural, anything else you want to come up with that resonates for you. And I think as an academy, we need to be leading the coverage of being upstanding in this space, because we will always be in a water crisis. It will never end. It's never going to change. It's finite. And the only crisis is that of a brave willingness for commitment, governance, and respectful action. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Michelle.
Thanks, Therese. I'll say that there's probably some similar themes that will come out in my presentation, but maybe a different style. I think I'm maybe a little bit wordier, but we can audience check at the end of that. So I guess I do want to talk about that collective action and very much about the crisis. And I guess my viewpoint is from my involvement through Water Stewardship Asia Pacific, and having that very much collective action, equitable effort, equitable outcomes type of approach. Sorry. Yeah, I think it was just asleep. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Ngunnawal people, and recognise their connection to country and the knowledge and value that they bring to the whole water sector, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So I probably want to take a little bit of a different tact and start looking at, maybe some of the global trends and pictures to then kind of drill down to that local type of impact. I think, if we all look at the data and information, it is quite clear that climate's changing. We're more exposed to those extreme events. And I guess, a theme that, I probably struggle with in my day job is kind of differentiating the long-term change and projections versus the more immediate and real-time extreme events like drought or flood. And they are interconnected, but they're also different in terms of perhaps sometimes your thinking or your ability to influence the timeframes of actions. But I mean, I won't go into that, but we know sea levels rising, warming, temperatures warming. We look at that top chart, and it's just showing worse floods, worse droughts, and how that's changing over time. I think we can look back over the past 20 or 30 years and go, I can relate. It's not anything that's, completely out there. And talking about SDGs and the water crisis, it's not the future. It is here and now. And, if you look at recent reports on the Sustainable Development Goals, we have, over 2 billion people that live in water-stressed countries. We have people who don't have access to safe water, sanitation, ecosystems degraded, species lost. So, this is real. It's been happening for a long time. We can't pretend that a water crisis is something in the future to deal with. We have to deal with it here and now. And I did want to give that picture, projections. There's a lot of uncertainty, right? We're all dealing with that. But, I think we're all gaining more and more confidence in the information that's being provided and the lived experience that we are moving towards higher water stress. And that is going to put increasing pressure on these systems that are already in crisis. And, from my perspective, it's why we do have to work together, because it's not just about meteorological drought or, extraction. It's about how we work together to get the balance, to look at solutions, identify solutions that are appropriate, fit for purpose, cost effective, and solve some of these real societal challenges. Imagine not having clean water in your house or being able to go to the toilet. It's, billions of people who don't have that right. So then if we look at the Australian context, I think Andy summarised it very well, it's getting warmer, drier in the south, a bit wetter in the north, and this is from the CSIRO Bureau of Meteorology climate information report, so you can Google it and get the information. I've put some snapshots there, but this is what we're actually seeing on the ground. It is real that, things are getting dry, even though we might have, floods in parts of the country. And I guess that's what I was saying about the complication of extreme events, climate change or drying. Weather isn't just a continual gradual thing that we, can incrementally adapt to. We have these big events that cause the crisis, that get the governance response for a short period of time, that maybe do some transformation and change things to some degree. But then we when they disappear, we drop back down to this kind of steady, gradual trend where we kind of think doing a little bit, is kind of good enough. And then if we look more locally around southern Australia and, particularly ACT region, we've seen those trends as well. It's, quite clear that particularly since the millennium drought, that rainfalls are continuing, aside from the blip, to reduce. And, it is to do with all the weather patterns and the change in those global drivers that are impacting us here locally. And so kind of in that context, when working in drought more recently, came up with definitions of drought, and I thought it'd be so appropriate to use here. What is drought? You have meteorological drought, which then leads to agricultural drought. You have hydrological drought, where there's water scarcity, and then obviously impacts on communities, the socioeconomics. But, we look at water scarcity, hydrological drought, it's not just caused by climate. We have management systems, over allocation, overuse of, water to unsustainable limits that causes those scarcity conditions. It's not just climate. But on the flip side, if it's not just climate, but we also have tools and innovations and ways to manage this, the socio-economic drought, we can build resilience in communities and systems to help them better manage these periods. So I guess I'd also like to say, while it's a crisis and there's lots we need to do, we can come up with solutions. We can avoid this if we work together and see the impact, build resilience in our systems. And so I just wanted to reflect on that kind of balance then. If we're looking at over-extraction and equitable use of water in a catchment, there are trade-offs that have to be made. We've tried to take as much water to satisfy everyone, and that clearly hasn't worked. That's why we've needed things like the basin plan to try and rebalance the system. Whether that's working or not, there's an evaluation that will be released in fairly soon, and a review coming up next year that I'd very much encourage everyone to contribute to and put their voices forward. That's the only way we're going to make change, is by having our voices heard. So I think this is no surprise to you that agriculture is the biggest user, households, urban, then we have manufacturing, mining, other industries. But what's not on here is recognising other uses, other cultural, social, environmental uses. But what it does show is that the web is complex and the stakeholders are complex, which is why I keep saying that collective action and collaboration is very much needed to address the issues that are arising from a drying climate, from over-allocation and unsustainable practices. But I will also say, while water is life, so is food. So we need to think about how we can support our agricultural industries, reduce their take, improve their productivity, and supply food. So that's where I kind of lean on the principles of things like water stewardship. And in the next slide, I'll just give a bit of a background to that, which you might be a little bit surprised about. But the whole principle straight up is the social and cultural equitable use of water. So it's putting that up front rather than extractive uses like agriculture industry. And so it's very much looking at the system, the catchment approach. So while there are very much local implications, you're in a catchment and you are connected. And so you need to think about how you're connected to those other parts of the system. And so looking at ecosystems, water sanitation, and hygiene, and resilient businesses, which include agriculture, but also other types of industries. And again, similar, 5 outcomes, very easy to kind of map to and quite relevant everywhere you go. And so the whole water stewardship approach and framework, you're probably not surprised that it was initiated in Australia by Australians during the Millennium Drought. And so the concept kicked off in 2007. We worked with a number of international partners to have the first international water stewardship standard launched in 2014. So, 11 years ago. It is a stakeholder inclusive process. So this is where the collective action, so particularly with businesses, it's about the local improvements you can do on site, but how you work within a catchment to achieve those outcomes. And I will kind of step through, but the one thing that I will say is my experience over the past 10 years, and it's probably where we're kind of falling short on some of the governance things, is that it's been very much dominated by big multinational companies who have got money to spend in particular places and have perhaps some different ideas about how stewardship's approached. So when you look at how it can be applied in Australia, it's not the same. And so in our kind of local branch, we've been very much, taking that on board and looking at adaptive management approaches to how we can make a stewardship approach more relevant, purposeful and effective in Australia. And I'll take you through a couple of examples. So first is the Renmark Irrigation Trust. I'll say leading the way because they're the first agricultural enterprise to employ the water stewardship approach and be certified. So they are, supply over 600 irrigators. They've got 140 kilometres of pipeline. So during the Millennium Drought and particularly in, I didn't touch anything. And in the context of the development of the basin plan, they wanted to demonstrate that they were responsible water users in the Murray-Darling Basin and achieve Gold Star standard. They're now in the process of moving to a different system, a verification, which includes all their growers. So their original approach was their business, their pipeline, but now they're expanding to the growers who access water. So we're kind of looking at that multiplier effect of broadening the impact of sustainable water use and responsibility. But it's not just on, like I said, it's not just about local, it's also about how they interact with the system and the catchment. So, they contribute to things like the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder by helping deliver environmental water to wetlands that can't be reached by natural flows from the river. They have a 98% efficiency. Now, this data's a little bit out of date because I would expect, and I could be maybe surprised that maybe it's not happened, but 83% should be much higher because the investment in irrigation efficiency projects since 2015. But that's just, it's not based on evidence, so I'll own that up. And then if we look at food manufacturing, so they were a very small piece of the pie, but Ingham's in particular, they wanted to demonstrate their responsible water use. So in the Millennium Drought, again, a huge driver. So we're talking about crisis and a response. These are perfect examples. They were listed in the biggest, I think it was 30 water users in Victoria. They got absolutely had reputational damage. They wanted to do something about it. So this was a way for them to demonstrate that they're actually responsible water users and reduce their water footprint. So they worked with the local water utility, Southeast Water. They did achieve certification, but the things I want to drive home here is that they engaged with the stakeholders. They made significant efforts in the local community and did a lot of environmental remediation work, supported education programs, as well as on-site improvements for their own business in terms of water recycling and reducing water use. So you can see that a focus for a business on being responsible water users that includes the community, improves education, improves outcomes, not just on site, but for the broader catchment. And these are the principles that I think because we all share, water is life. We live in the catchments. We need to be participating, have voices in some of these management decisions or how businesses operate. So I guess taking that all on board, 20 years down the track, through lived experience, does it matter? Are we doing things differently, or are we just kind of gone back to the same old management approaches, governance arrangements before the Millennium Drought? So I think it's a little bit varied. I think we are doing better in most cases, and there are some things I really wanted to kind of draw out because I think it's really quite interesting, I guess, in my current day job when I'm looking at future water securities planning for the region. I kind of look at some of the things that have happened in the past and think about how we can do better in the future. So, desalination plants, and take Adelaide, for example, outcry about a desal plant being built back in the day, but it's, applauded now. What great foresight. South Australia's in a drought and the desal plant's supporting water supply. What a great investment. So, for me, that calls upon that sometimes our leaders, our governance, we need to be brave when we're faced with some of these decisions, that yes, there's uncertainty, but we know that given, all the implications of not having a secure, safe water supply, that we need to be brave and make these investments. So it's about appropriate timing, appropriate investment, but making the decision, because the more we defer it, the more it costs, not just in terms of the technology, but cost to community, cost to businesses, cost to the environment. So we need to be doing better in how we make decisions and learn from those examples of the past. And I won't get into things like Toowoomba with the water recycling, but I've been involved in, because I do want to kind of finish off on the R&D thing, for the past 20 odd years, involved in collaborative R&D organisations. And it's been really inspiring to be part of that mix, the different stakeholders. So working with people who are going to implement outcomes, working with scientists who are developing these great innovations, developing a research base, and working with industry and government to make change in terms of policy and governance. But it's been, if you look at the past 10 years, it's becoming quite a sad story. So the graph just shows the top line is the OECD average. The red dots is Australia's investment. Now that's across all sectors and all types of investors. But clearly, and it's not just that there's a gap between us and the OECD. We are decreasing our investment in R&D. It's very troubling. And John, drawing on your paper with Peter Dillon and Robert Tessie a while ago, you can look at water R&D investment, 2010 to 2015, it's dropped. Do you think I can get a number now? There's these wonderful dashboards. Go have a look from parliamentary to Department of Industry. You can see various different cuts of R&D investment, but I cannot find a way to give a number about investment in water research. So there's soil and water that has 85 projects, environment 101, agriculture 68. And so I think you can kind of see the picture here. There's investment in very disaggregated programs that have very narrow visions. Maybe some are collaborative, maybe some aren't, but there's such a lost opportunity in that reduction in investment that is being spread like Vegemite everywhere, that we're not maximising the benefits of either that investment, our expertise and collaboration to create the impact that we need. it's a complete waste, if you ask me. And in terms of, how should we do things better? National coordination, absolutely. But I think if we look at the past 15 years, we can see organisations that have been created and then shut down without funding. So my recommendation would be, what organisations have survived? Can we use those existing governance, institutional arrangements to help increase our water R&D footprint? I would like to hope that, there is hope that this, through the, Andy, what is it, the strategic R&D review process at the moment, that's been led by the Department of Industry under the new minister. Maybe there's something that can eventuate out of that, but we just look at this. We need to take action. We need to take action collectively, and it's not just about investment in new science. It's also about how we translate that science and get it out to people who need to have the technology, the information to help make decisions, be it government or people on the ground growing our food. And then, so I probably covered a lot of this with, a very passionate plea about investing in research and taking approach, but, we can do stuff now. We don't need to wait until we're all in absolute crisis to do something. There are things we can do. We need to, if we look at community engagement, for example, it takes so long to build trust. We should make sure that we have that in place now. We should be looking at how we make decisions and whether it's decreasing uncertainty or how you can help decision makers make decisions now rather than defer. So whether it's scenarios, more data and information, or strengthening governance. We need to be looking at what can we do better to get those decisions made to help prepare us for the future. And I will say, but without the huge cost to communities, because communities pay for these actions. So we need to make sure that what we do is prudent and efficient and equitable. So if we look at things like demand management, for example, in houses, I think that is great. So there are probably two things there. We've made huge savings since the millennium drought. So it's not a lever that we can use much anymore, because I think water use dropped about 40% and it's probably only come up about 10, 15%. So, we're much more efficient than what we used to be. So to get those savings again is hard, but then not everyone can invest in water efficient machines or shower heads or different things. And so we need to look at how we can support different parts of our community that may not have access to or can afford those types of technologies and innovations and help them. So this is my last slide, and I just wanted to, so this is a personal reflection and a project that I've been involved in for the past, or had been involved in, for the past 2 or 3 years. For me, I learned so much from this approach. It's very humbling. So basically, when I was involved in the drought resilience mission, dealing with ag science, doing climate models, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, Bradley Mogridge. We're like, but we don't understand country. We don't have a baseline. We need to have an Indigenous voice in the things that we do in terms of building resilience. And so as a result of that, this project was developed, and I was fortunate enough to be involved, help establish it, but also to learn so much about how you might engage truly in a co-design process, which is this little map here. The report's published on the CSIRO website, and I can certainly share the link, about how you co-design, you co-develop outcomes, you set up rules for what you can share, what you can't. But for me, I guess what I learned, I guess my reflections are, being on country, hearing the stories firsthand, really hit home about what's changed and the value of that knowledge system where it can be used, because obviously, it's not always able to be used for other reasons. But I would like us to think in that Western science context, when we're collecting knowledge and information to reduce uncertainty, it doesn't always have to be computer modelling or gauging stations. There are traditional knowledge systems over millennia and experiences on country that can help us make decisions that aren't just about what level of treatment do we need, but how do we support our community and our country to get the best outcome for everyone. So I'll leave that there. Thank you.
That was amazing. There was a couple of really excellent talks. Thank you, in terms of painting the picture for us, but also a path forward and how we can improve it, and also the impediments of trying to do that in a world where there are declining financial support for what we do. I'll go to, so I've got time for questions and answers. I will, through politeness, go to the online ones first to see if we have any questions. I don't know whether we've got a chat function or anybody's putting up their hands.
There's no questions yet.
No. Okay. All right. Well then, I'll open the floor to the room, and if that encourages others online to join in.
Blown them all.
I know.
You have.
We've solved the problem.
I might just say, Michelle and I found it quite interesting that we actually prepared this very independently, because we both had other things that we had. And we talked for about 10 minutes last week, and we realised we were both bookending on Indigenous cultural knowledge, and that wasn't planned, or that's how it happened. And I thought that was just a really great moment to see that is coming through quite fundamentally, and it is generally absolutely important, and we need to be finding ways to make that just completely instilled. Yeah. Yep. So that, yeah.
Well, John, go on.
I was wondering whether you'd comment on whether there's any chance of us getting back to a level of governance that's a catchment or regional biodiversity reality, that the people on the ground have a say in how we actually govern the process, or is it just lost?
Just before you answer, I'll just repeat it online just to make sure. So John just asked whether or not we can have a governance system that really takes into account local community and global structures in order to be able to build resilient water usage and stewardship platforms.
The simple answer is yes, we can. And we've actually got a lot more tools and ability to do so than we ever have. Yet that has created more of the reasons why we don't, it seems. So I think it comes to having a core, if you want to call it a flag on a hill, but I actually hate that analogy, but if you had a National Water Commission and you had national policy and you had true dissemination that aligned all the way down to local and cultural and all the way back up, and there was alignment and everyone could see how that was fitting together rather than how it was being divided and divisive, I think we can get there. And I can't see why we don't. Other than all the barriers and interferences that are put in there, which most of it is noise. When you actually speak to people, and you probably experience this on country, but when you speak to people in stewardship and stakeholder level through to those that do govern different elements, they're all saying the same thing, but we just seem to get everything in the way. So yeah, I think we can.
I'd like to be optimistic. I think we can. I think some maybe of the blockage is the unwillingness of governments to take risks. Because, like I learned through the co-design process, we had this great project idea and we thought we'd get these particular outcomes, but you go through a co-design process, you end up somewhere completely different than where you start. And I don't think we have the structures or the risk appetite to actually do that true co-design process, and that's what's needed to building voices.
Yeah, so governments want to invest in surefire things before they start, allow them to.
Well, you don't know where you're going to end, or what opposition you're going to have competing voices. Yep.
My comment would be that we've not got a governance structure that can enhance that engagement and ownership. You see, if you look at the water resource plans, who owns them? Whose are they? Who is accountable for them? Who cares if they work or they don't work? So we really, my experience, it would be that what you're saying is so important, but we need to have a governance structure that enables it to be empowered. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing about, just to interject, is if you've got really good governance systems that work at multiple levels right down to the community, then it can work for all environmental activities, right? All environmental challenges working together.
I think that's why I often bang on about ESG principles, and I think of environment social governance not just in the terms of the financial markets, but in the true sense of what ESG is meant to be about. And if you go through those sort of 30 to 50 fundamentals and you tick box each one of those, you actually get those governance outcomes. But that brave commitment is what causes the crisis and the divisiveness, and the response to the media cycle and the media drama and, the noise in the system has become so loud compared to 10, 20 years ago. And I think, we need to bravely interject on that. And I hope at ATSE that's something we're trying to do. And, Michelle touched on the investment in R&D, and that's another key platform and policy advocacy area for ATSE as well. And we need to keep pushing that absolutely home. Yep.
Thank you.
I know it's all new for me, but it seems to me there's a fundamental conflict between irrigators and irrigation water and environmental flows. And you're never going to make everybody happy. I don't think all refined words will solve this, except R&D might. If you can get more with less, you might.
I'll just repeat the question again for the online audience. I was just saying, there's this fundamental conflict between the agricultural sector that want to use the water and the environment that needs it. And in order to be able to bring those two together, we need around how do we optimise, we need to have better research.
Yes, and
Optimistically share.
yeah, no, absolutely. And, you're right. And, if you look at Murray-Darling Basin, that's the whole, tension, the over-allocation to irrigators has implications, cause severe degradation to the environment. And so the whole rebalancing is about environmental values. That wouldn't happen. So strong government decision-making to rebalance things in the basin. But you're right, it does have implications for agriculture, socioeconomics. And I don't think anyone can say that it doesn't. But there are opportunities in R&D, water efficiency, diversification.
People I can't believe it with the cost of water these days.
Well, it's the efficiency, so it's the technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're getting less product per megalitre than you could
More
with
product. More product, yep.
Yeah, inefficiency would be.
Yeah.
More efficient.
Yep. So John's probably got something to say on that.
It's not just the efficiency, but it's what we're extracting. For example, if we understand what we're extracting on the floodplain and make sure that we're looking at the whole system, that's where a lot of the tension is.
And it's quality and quantity, and a lot of focus is
Overpumping
put on quantity rather than the right quality in the right place at the right time as well.
It's capturing the overland flow on the floodplains, and which is not built into the analysis of what sustainable extraction is. There's a whole lot of process that's not in the suds, and that's causing most of the problem in the upper Darling.
Yep. And also the, earthworks and things like that redirect water flows. So there's the extraction, but also redirection.
Say, Tony, that most irrigators want to use every drop to the best benefit you can.
But we're getting extra water by pumping flood flows. They're doing it legally at the moment, but maybe that doesn't have a great fix.
So I had a question about aquifers. Aquifers is the way we've kind of learned to get around water crises by exploiting there's untapped water resources that exist below the ground, and yet we're realising very rapidly the degree to which those untapped resources are extremely fragile and having to resort to desalination plants as a way of compensating for. how can we better use those aquifers? Do we have the scientific knowledge to be able to use those aquifers sustainably?
We don't have enough knowledge on groundwater, surface water, irrigation water interactions, including floodplain. All parts of that cycle are lesser known than the in-river sort of gauging, the in-dam, that's reasonably robust. I think importantly, and this was something Michelle and I were reflecting on, and I think I was with somebody else in the room during the pre-lunch, is you can't stop development for the lack of perfect knowledge. So better governance can be the leading edge to ongoing knowledge. And you can continue to build that knowledge as you continue to grapple with these issues. If we keep waiting for the knowledge and the information to then lead the governance and the policy, we'll always be behind. So if I take it back up out of that, the basic philosophical principle is get the governance right, get that investment in the knowledge. There's also a hell of a lot of untapped knowledge, that a wonderful digital data lake that had some basic definitions that slammed it all together would probably give us a lot more knowledge in the next year than we can possibly invest in anyway. But we're really not using a lot of those digital tools to their full strength. And a lot of that is variations in databases, variations in definitions, and there's all the reasons and all the barriers. My view is that if we slam it all together and it's about 70% right, that's good enough for the first version of the iPhone, right? And then you keep building on the version control and keep making improvements. But everyone is too concerned about stepping too forward or too far without pure factual knowledge. So sometimes we've got to be able to find the right language to say near enough is good enough for a lot of situations, but that doesn't mean you dismiss continuing to build that knowledge. You keep enhancing it and you keep having that continuous improvement. But that's, usually we go, oh, we can't line that database up with that one, so we won't worry.
So by everyone, I assume you mean governments, which goes back to Michelle's point about governments not being prepared to take risks.
Well, a lot of it's in private sector hands as well.
Yeah,
So I'd say it's private sector and governments. The couple of projects I've worked in where we've tried to smash together, and I'm using it in a very non-technical term, some, data lakes was, lawyers got involved. There you go.
I say, but the other thing in terms of groundwater knowledge, but also the monitoring, measuring of usage and things like that. And, you think the decline in R&D spend is bad, you should see the decline in monitoring and evaluation. It's worse. And that really underpins a lot of adaptive management decision-making.
But to me, these all fundamental, because I work in environmental management, right? Biological threats, we never know enough detail, but the management challenge is identical and the approach to be able to achieve it is identical. So there's a lot of cross-sectoral value from this. No more questions? Any more questions online? Any questions online, Luke? All right, well, I'll finish by really thanking Therese and Michelle for giving us a couple of really very stimulating talks. Thank you for those who joined us today for our webinar. I've just got an announcement from Helen that I've got to find before we wind up. Just give me a second. We've got our July webinar event on the topic of net zero. What does it mean for the ATSE and the ACT with Drew Clark and Heather Legge as presenters? And then next week, on the 5th of June, we have our National Oration annual meeting for the ACT Fellows. So please don't put those in your calendars and join us for those two events. That would be wonderful. And before I finish, I'd like to thank the ATSE HQ team, Luke in particular, for helping us put on today's events and providing us with some light lunch. It's a great venue to be able to come to and spend a bit of time together at, and look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Thank you.